Thanks for joining us. I'm Christina Naylor. I'm the new chair of the WSESD, the Windham Southeast Supervisory District. I'm joined by my able-bodied representative who hails from the town of Brattleboro, David Scholes.
Do we need a sign-in sheet?
We do need a sign. Well, maybe we don't. I think I can. Well, I don't. There's only one name I don't know. Actually, David, could you get put a sign-up sheet going around just so we can get all the names of the attendees for the minutes? So we have the WSESD board. Did everybody see this? I don't know where to
Julianne, do you know where this in paper that David's looking for? Oh, we
got it.
found it.
That's a trap.
Oh, sorry.
Great.
Ooh, living life on the edge here. Got it. Thank you to Julianne, my
Handmade signs,
technical wizard.
sign-in sheets.
So there is a vote on November 19th. This coming Tuesday. Hello. Entrance, sign in, please. This coming Tuesday, early voting's already started. There will be voting for the 4 amendments to the WSESD, that's the Windham Southeast Supervisory District default articles. So I wanted to start from the very beginning. What are articles? So as of July 1, 5 previous districts that we all knew and loved, the Brattleboro Town, the Guilford, the Putney, the Dummerston, and the BUHS district, were merged by the state into the Windham Southeast School District. Yes?
Do you want comments during your presentation or afterwards?
Clarification, I guess, would be fine. If you need clarification as a former seventh grade teacher, I'll take it.
Okay. Other comments at the end.
Often foolhardy for a board chair, but I can't negate the fact that I taught middle school, and I would hate to have somebody flounder for the rest of it. And then, so when we were forced merged, the state created default articles, kind of a one-size-fits-all for all the merged districts to govern the new WSESD, and that talks about how many people represent each district, each forming district, grade operation, where students attend schools. So why are we amending, why are we changing these articles? We've had a lot of concerns from many community members about a lot of the articles because one size does not fit all, perhaps. Maybe it does. And the transition board proposed these articles, building on the experience in the study committee. Some of the articles come directly from the study committee work on like leadership councils. That was an idea. I think Kim Price brought it to the study committee, talking about how we could sort of change how we get local input from the schools in this larger merged district. And so we all worked together to create articles that address community concerns. That was the intent of these articles, these amendments. So the first article amendment is on representation. So in the current WSESD article, there's 2 board members from each town, 2 that reside in Brattleboro, 2 that are residents of Dummerston, 2 from Guilford, 2 from Putney, for 8 total members. And all members are elected at large to represent all stakeholders in all districts. So even though I'm a resident of Dummerston, I represent my dear colleagues from the great town of Putney that sit right there. And they elect me. I am their representative. Our proposed change is that we will have 4 board members that are Brattleboro residents, 2 members that are resident of each of the remaining towns, so 2 from Dummerston, 2 from Guilford, 2 from Putney, for 10 total WSESD board members. And the at-large representation, all board members are elected at large to represent all stakeholders in all districts. So that will continue to be true. Just because those 4 Brattleboro representatives are from Brattleboro, they will continue to represent all of the stakeholders in the WSESD. Is that clear? There's another change in Article 1 also that came from concerns from town clerks. The AOE had given guidance that the ballots that after voting, so on any election day or town meeting day, after the clerks run the count all day and run an election all day, they are supposed to drive with those ballots with another representative to Brattleboro to count the individual WSDSD ballots. This was not popular because that would make for a very long day. There was input from the state that this is not optional because people it might cause counting errors if somebody's working from 7 in the morning till perhaps midnight. So this was a recommendation from the Director of Elections at the Secretary of State's office that we count the ballots, that we will now count the ballots locally when you have your normal Board of Civil Authority counters available, and then the results will be transmitted to the WSESD clerk, which at this point is Barb Nowakowski, so she will do the final tallying and reporting of those counted ballots. So that's just a change that clarifies our intent that we won't have our town clerks running elections starting at 7 in the morning and finishing at midnight, and our boards of civil authority won't have to drive to Brattleboro to count or wear a different hat. Yes.
Could you go back and explain the reasons for wanting to expand the size of the board?
Yes, and so I want to be very careful with my words because by law I have to be, I cannot recommend, I'm here to inform. So in the spirit of informing where the concerns came from, there was a lot of constituents in Brattleboro that felt that given their large population, it was hard for people to have connections to only 2 representatives. And they felt like since Brattleboro is so much larger than the outlying communities, they wanted to have something a bit more proportional. This doesn't get all the way to proportionality, but something a little more proportional to how many people they had in their community and how many students they represented, that they had more representatives. The board also was very interested in making some kind of change to increase the numbers because we now manage 10 different schools. And so it is very challenging to have a representative that could be working on a leadership council, which I'll get to later, I should have done that first, but that can be a representative to a school-based advisory group when it was only 8 of us. We're stretched very thin, and I know I'm working 40, 50 hours a week at this job, and so we need more people to be on committees. So that was the other reason the board sought to increase representation. And then this choice, this 4222, was addressing the concerns of a lot of people in Brattleboro. Does that? Yeah. Tara?
Can I add something here? Okay. Tara Cassian Putney. I've mentioned this at other meetings as well, but I just want to, in the context of the meeting where we're talking about these amendments, there was no actual vote by the board except for during the vote for these meeting notice to go out to the public on the 4222. There was multiple references in meeting notes regarding waiting for lawyer comments or during board meetings to defer the discussion for comments back from the lawyer on what the options could be to discuss them. In July, we had started conversating about it, and the conversation was halted due to wanting to know what we could legally discuss. On 10/2, it was noted in the meeting notes that the committee would bring forth a recommendation at the next meeting. On 10/16, this was brought forward, and I asked, which is not noted in the meeting notes, but you can find it in the video, where 422 was voted on, and I was told that if I looked, I would find it. And I looked, and I did not find an official vote by the board. I would urge people to really question, I would have liked to see where the board members were. I would have liked to be able to comment on that as a Putney resident on the addition of 2 members to the Brattleboro residents, and be able to have a discussion on what actually works for the 4 different towns that are part of this merged district to cause or have equality of voice on the board, not necessarily a representation of the voting populace. And that's all. I just wanted to make sure that during these meetings we're discussing this, it is noted that that vote was not actually taken.
So I think that was a misstatement, and I think it tended to follow a process that generally follows on boards, that you refer things back to committee, the committee comes and reports. For example, creating budgets at the WSESD level, you refer to the finance committee. We don't vote on every line item, you vote a slate. I think something this important would have been improved had we voted on everything, but it did show up, and our committee meetings are open meetings, warned, minutes taken, and people show up and come to those meetings.
But also
but
yeah, that's okay.
But I mean, there was public input on 422. I have Ruby and Robin commenting on August 7th when we were going with 422 on the basis of the attorney. On August 16th on the amendment committee, the notes reflect we were talking about 4222. We updated it. So you're right, the vote for this, but there was a full vote taken to move this slate forward on October 16th.
Right,
so
as part of these
right, to move the whole slate, right.
meeting notes.
Right.
Right.
Right, that was the warning, this was the finished product. We didn't have the finished product before that because the lawyer going back and forth with the Secretary of State.
And that's what the meeting
AOE.
notes reflect, is waiting for comments by
Right,
the lawyer.
Right, so determine if we could do at large about the voting. There was so much back and forth. This was like a constant
There
struggle.
wasn't really once the lawyer had commented on what was actually able to be voted on or discussed, there was no discussion. That included the populace. It was, here's what you are going to be voting on.
Well, I think, yes,
Yeah, I think that's really an unpleasant or an unfortunate characterization. It sounds like we're just jamming it down someone's throat saying, here's what you're going to be voting on.
Well, I specifically asked on
Please
1016,
let me.
and I was told that you
please let me
voted on
speak,
it.
Please.
Yep.
The process mostly took place in committee. When we brought the whole package forward, we didn't vote on any of them. We didn't vote on whether school closure should be delayed 5 years. We didn't vote on the removing of grades. We didn't vote on any of them separately. Everybody knew what was in there, and everyone's vote clearly expressed that they understood this as a combining of all the controversial aspects of this merger into a package that was acceptable to everybody and would take those conflicts out of the board process so that we could do the work of representing everybody and not have to be worried about, gee, is this going to happen or is that going to happen? And we didn't separate out any of them. And looking with hindsight, it's great. It would have been nice to just vote on every single one of them and have everything out in public, lots of conversations. But we spent months and months and months on this. We came to a conclusion that everybody in the board pretty much recognizes the way to go forward. So they approved it, and now it's in front of you.
so I just don't want the characterization that we never voted on it because we voted on a slate, just like we voted on 35 policies the week before to start the school. So we
But I
voted
did
on
want
a
to
slate.
discuss it at the 1016 meeting, and it was shut down via the comments by a representation that it had already been voted on. So that would have been the time where I, as a public person, could have commented on it instead of just being shut down and not been able to talk about it. So I would urge,
Well,
making sure that-
I apologize if, I quite apologize as the chair if you felt like you didn't have the opportunity to comment. And I think that perhaps the better question, like, I should have asked the question, like, is there something you want to say now? That would have been a better chairing on my part
I was
to
actually
say.
quite embarrassed by the comments and by the way in which I was shut down in that meeting. Just as
I
a,
apologize for that, and,
I mean, because I have
as a-
been here and I'm watching and I'm listening, and it's just disappointing that we couldn't discuss it.
I will try and be a better chair, and I apologize that that happened to you. And thank you for showing up, Tara. We all appreciate that. Yes, Paul?
Paul Nemendo, Dummerston. I share some of her sentiments also, in the sense that I don't deny that you did the work in committee. I don't deny that you've been talking about it in committee for a long time. However, I would have liked to have seen some discussion on the entire board level of these various articles that are being amended, just so that you could see where the various representatives stood. And so you'd know how people from Putney had voted, you'd know how people from Guilford voted, you'd know how people from Brattleboro voted. And just to have the interaction and to bring the committee discussions to the board and have the board, because the committees aren't filmed. So the public as a whole did not have an opportunity to partake in the decision, not in the decision-making process, but in the, in hearing what the logic was and commenting on that logic. So I think, I think there was a lack of, for lack of a better word, lack of transparency in pushing, and it felt like it was a push forward.
So, I mean, there were policy and amendment committee updates at about 10 meetings that I did give that, and you know me, if somebody wants to comment, I think this board has been pretty liberal in assuring the public gets heard. So I will try and do a better job on big issues like that. Clearly, there was some ancillary issues that were dragging this board down a little bit in terms of getting this work done, and so I apologize on behalf of the chair, who could have done a better job putting the agenda together.
Well, I don't think you should assume that, the whole responsibility, but on the other hand, I think it's a lesson to be learned in terms of, if you're trying to convince the public, I think the more information you can get to the public, the better it is. And the less done, at least if it's done in committee, let the discussion, the general discussion take place on the board level, entire board level.
Yes, Jody.
Jody Normando, Dummerston. Do you want to continue on this line, or would you like to get through your
I'd like
program
to
and
get
come
through the
back to
program in
this?
case people
Because I
have
have some comments
Thank you.
also.
Okay, I'd like to do this and then we can.
Okay.
So the next article changing, the second article considers grade operation. We have schools that operate different grades. For example, you're sitting in a pre-K through 8 school. Guilford is a pre-K through 6 school. The current articles say that there can be no change in grade operation for the first 2 years, and after 2 years, the WSESD board can make a grade change operation by a majority vote on the board. The proposed amendment changes say there'll be no change in grade operation for the first 3 years whatsoever, that before a grade change is made, so one of the concerns, this comes from the concern from the room I'm sitting in right now, that there be some discontinuation of grades 7 and 8 down the road in Putney and Dummerston, and those students would be sent to BAMS. So this was a concern that came from the Putney-Dummerston end of things, but I think other schools share those concerns. For example, in other districts, 6th grade has been moved up to the middle school. That's what the new district is considering doing. So in this case, the board, after the first 3 years, the board must undergo 1 year of study, have a community forum in the affected communities, and report on the impact of the grade change. For example, if you were moving, this is not proposed, if you were moving the Putney students to BAMS, what would be the effect on their ability to participate in extracurricular activities? How much time would be spent on a school bus? What would be the ecological impact of that? We'd have to do that within a year. If the proposal was to combine Putney and Dummerston middle schools in one building, and maybe make one school, this is not proposed, but maybe make one school a K through 3 and pre-K through 3 and one 4 through 8. Well, that would affect Putney and Dummerston. So you would have to do studies with both communities to understand the impact, and then both Putney and Dummerston would have to agree to that change after it's put to a vote.
Of the towns.
Of the towns, yes. The board must approve it, and then the town must approve it. So in this case, Putney and Dummerston, if we were going to do that change, both Putney and Dummerston would have to vote on that. Is that clear? Any points of clarification? The third article is changes to the school closure article. The current article says no schools can be closed for the first 2 years. After that, it would only require a majority of the WSESD board to close the school. The proposed amendment changes, and a lot of this language comes from the study committee, and then there's additional language about the vote. There's no school closure for the first 5 years. Our schools are pretty full, so I don't think there's any ability to do that in the near term anyway. We are not having the precipitous drop of students that many districts are. After 5 years, similar to a grade change operation, The board must undergo 1 year of study, hold a community forum, and report on the impact of the school closure. Oh, this is what happens when you do your PowerPoint at the last minute. It has to be supported by a majority of the WSESD board, and then the town in which the school closure is proposed must vote to support. See that I copied it, sorry about that. I did this afternoon and I was like, I don't have a presentation, this probably needs a presentation. Each affected town must vote to support the school closure. So similar idea to the grade change. Article 4, finally, something non-controversial. Leadership Council. So this was an idea that came from the study committee, and it's being done in a lot of parts of Vermont. And the idea behind it is to to increase community participation at the school level. Previously, I know in Dummerston and Putney, we each had board members with 5 people. You could probably find somebody on a playground or at a sporting event or at Hannaford's. That's where everybody finds me. Find you in Hannaford's and ask the question. So how could we sort of create a conduit? And so the idea behind the leadership councils was that they would be school-based councils. Every school would have a council, and the council would be made up of the principal, a WSESD board member, staff, so teachers, guidance counselors, paraprofessionals, community members, and then students where appropriate, especially at BUHS and the regional WRCC. Those would be great places for students to participate on leadership councils. So the leadership council's work is guided by interest and may include providing feedback on proposed policies, participating in hiring committees, working on community communications, or communicating school needs to the WSESD board based on community values. There's several other ideas on there, but they would be guided by leadership council interest. You might have people that are really interested in working on improving local food and working on a local food initiative. That would be a perfect thing for a leadership council to work out the nuts and bolts of that, which would have been done perhaps by a board and a committee in the past. This board does not have the bandwidth at this point to be working on those logistics, so that would be a great place to have it done in the leadership council through the board member, the WSESD board member that attends, could bring that initiative to the full board at budgeting time and said, next year, Dummerston wants to increase their use of local food by 10%, and this is the plan, and this is how much it costs. So that way we can have keep that community input that's really important, and I think has been a cornerstone of why our schools are so vibrant in Vermont. Yes?
In terms of the hiring piece of that, is there anything obligatory about that? Might somebody be strong-armed out of the process?
So there are definitely statutes that guide how hiring is done, but often, for example, for a principal search, for hiring the recent fabulous principal that we landed here in Dummerston, there was a community committee, there was a teacher committee, and there was a board committee. And God loved those candidates. They circled through all committees. I mean, it was a really wonderful hiring process. And then all the committees got together. So the leadership council would be a quick place that we would go, though we're not letting her ever leave. But I mean, other schools might have a retiring principal along the way. So it would be the logical place to put a hiring committee. The hiring is done by a principal for the school, by the superintendent, but you have advisor, oftentimes citizens are part of advisory groups for that. Did I answer that?
I think just not anticipating an issue, but might somehow the politics at some point be such that the superintendent and principal didn't include the council, a leadership council that really wanted to participate.
Oh, I think that could happen, yes. And so I think that and some school communities might be just fine with that too. I mean, having spent time in the 4 communities, people have different interests, different things that communities are particularly interested in. And I think I can speak for Dummerston, they were always interested in participating in hiring committees. And in some communities, not so much. So I think this is a way that it can be guided by community interest, and it's clearly written in the articles, so the desire to have that possibility, if this article passes, is enshrined in the Constitution of the WSESD, that if a community wants to do that, I mean, not for every single position, obviously, but if a community has an interest in involving community members and leadership councils in the hiring process, this gives them that backup, I guess. Yes. I'm sorry, I know everybody in the room, but could you just state your name?
Linda Rood, Dummerton. Is it in here anywhere how the leadership council gets selected?
No, because this is an article, and we did not want to have it be too rigid because things may change over time. So we have been simultaneously creating a policy at the policy committee level. So the article is like your constitution, and then you've got your operating manual for the United States, your case law and everything else. So it's in the policy. Half of the members of a leadership council have to be community members, and not. Let me go back. So 50% of the makeup of a leadership council has to be from this pot. You can't double count. If the principal lives in Dummerston, and 3 staff members live in Dummerston, and the WSESD board member lives in Dummerston, that doesn't work. You have to have 50% be community members so that you can have that outreach.
And is there, so that it has to, they're going to be 4?
What?
I mean, are the numbers determined?
You could have
or-
6. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's sort of community related.
And is it an election or a volunteer or?
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Yeah.
You wanna?
Yeah, we've been pretty clear all the way along, and I think, it's been slow to get this to unfold, and we're already having bumps with understanding and expectations. But I think the understanding and the expectation of the board all along is that the teachers would choose their representatives themselves, that the community and parents would choose their representatives themselves. The process would go through the principal because they would gather the information and then take the letters of interest, but we're not getting, so we're reconsidering that, and probably at the next meeting we'll reconsider and put some steps in place, and maybe we can just start over again. But the intention is for the teachers and the public to self-select and or be basically volunteer. The board formally has to appoint everybody. That that ultimate process, that process we're legally required to do. So that's our the plan.
We're kind of making it up as we
Yeah.
go along and figuring out what we're doing wrong as we go along. So that's the intent behind not making the Leadership Council article language too, well, it is clunky, but to make it too prescriptive, because, once you start a process, then you figure out, oh, we didn't think of that. So policies can be changed with 10 days notice, and we don't have a town vote. We don't have to send it all to the towns and vote. So we're feeling our way through and trying to make it work. Yes, Tara.
Tara Castine Putney. I would recommend, as part of your revamp of the program, I know through conversations we've had in Putney is that a lot of the teachers didn't recognize if this was an option for them. So maybe having a directive from the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union sent via email to the teachers in all the districts saying, hey, this is happening. Because I know we've enlisted some people that are like, wow, we can join conversations. And so I would recommend that, and the teacher lever, because they all have emails through the system, so you should be able to send an email that way.
I'm sure that's one of the methods that we used. I think tomorrow, at noon, our communications council, is that what?
Yes.
Is meeting, and one of the things that they're going to consider is how to do an outreach program for staff and for particularly for the public, but for staff as well, because we haven't been able to do it. We've been doing this basically, so we haven't been able to get to these other things, and it's not going the way we wanted, and so we're going to have to start over again. But once the amendment's in place and it's really clear, this is the law, this is the Constitution right here, so now we have to do what we have to do right.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll even have time, but I'm not going to count on that.
Jody.
Can I go back to representation, please?
Of course, somehow I knew you wanted to.
Jody Normandeau, Dummerston. I still have a lot of concerns about this representation article. And those concerns come from the study committee and being involved with it since 2015. And seeing where Brattleboro could in fact overpower the smaller districts. I was pleased when the state board, which I haven't been pleased with most things about them, but I was pleased that they gave us the default articles of equal representation, 2-2-2-2. And because everybody is supposed to represent all students and all towns. It has been clear since this Windham Southeast Supervisory District has formed that it's turned the other way to Brattleboro doesn't have enough representations. We're big, we need more representations, you know, and Putney this, Dummerston this, it's still town by town. And I know the board needs more representations. I was all in favor of giving them more votes, but still keeping the equal representation. And I also know that in your procedure, you did straw votes. And 4-2-2-2 was not the winning straw vote. There was other ones that were more powerful than that straw vote. And that was the only, I agree with Tara, that's the only individual vote you took on this. So, and I know.
So I want to just clarify, can I have a clarifying?
Can you have a clear? Yes, yes, ma'am.
May the chair make a clarifying statement? David Scholes was not at that meeting, and so when he was at the following Policy and Amendment Committee meeting, so if you took first and second, 4-2-2 was the winner. If we just took first once with David's vote, it was the winner. So I just want to, but he wasn't at that meeting, but I think it's a pretty important thing to include his vote in that.
I'm going to go back and look because
Okay.
I know David wasn't there, and I think I took that into consideration when I was looking. But however, and we've also been told by the lawyer, you've also been told by the lawyer, that we have to do it this way because there's one district that did that, and I do not think it's the only process in this. I think there were other options. And I think if you have equal representations, and I would like to see like a 3-3-3-3, which would give everybody equal, but give you more people on the board. If you have equal representations, you all have to work together in order to come up with a policy. No one town can overpower another town. And so, quite frankly, I will vote against this article.
It's up for a vote.
Yeah.
So everybody can, it's now up to the public, so.
They don't know what's going on. I'll tell you that.
Well, that's why we have BCTV
They
here.
still don't know what's going on.
And Mr. Scholes.
Yeah, I would prefer that you recognize we really did go through a really thorough process and tried to balance all of this. And rather than just vote no because you think your idea is better, vote yes, give us a chance, and if it doesn't work, you can do it all. If it turns out that this is terrible and we need a different system, let's do it again. But give us a chance to do this.
No, I have a vote.
Could flip it the other way.
Yeah.
Take your same
Yeah.
logic and just turn it over.
Well, if you vote no, then we stay 2-2-2-2.
Yeah.
We have a whole different range of problems. The primary one is going to be communication with the community because we are not going to have the resources to be able to do that adequately. And that's a really big price to pay.
But I can see where the board really does need more members because, I mean, your board is undertaking a insurmountable amount of work. And I don't know how you do it. You know, you need full-time workers as opposed to, you know, volunteers. And
I think we're going to have a proposal for board staff in the next budget because we simply can't function.
Yeah.
And maybe
the way we are now.
those two that you want to add could be at large totally. And Brattleboro is more powerful for votes, so if Brattleboro really wants to get out the vote, they could have those two votes. But they could go elsewhere too.
Ruby.
So I had a few things to comment, Ruby McAdoo from Putney, on this amendment piece also. I definitely want to acknowledge that I was there for many of the conversations. I heard reports from the committee, and I am going to be voting no, not because I don't think that you need more people, not because I don't think you were in good faith giving the only option you believed was proper, but because process is very important to me. And I do believe, and I understand that if you feel aggrieved by this as a board, but I do believe that the process was not followed, and what was stated in minutes, that it would come back for a vote to the board, was not followed. And that it was voted in this slate doesn't cut it for me. This was a very important piece, and it was stated it was important for many people to understand, do you vote for it, do you abstain, or do you vote no? I wanted to see that. I wanted to understand it, and that didn't happen. So there's that. And the second piece is that I would just urge your board, I realize you guys are in the hot seat all the time and everything. I mean, I've seen these turf discussions, it's horrible. You guys get it. And if we are saying things that don't feel right to you because you feel that you tried your best and you didn't mean to pull the wool over our eyes and you feel like that's what we're saying, I would just urge you to realize that some of the ways in which reactions to this particular point have come across, I'm perceiving them as dismissive. So saying, yeah, no, that was there and it's not, go look for it, that's dismissive. Saying something along the lines of, that's an unfortunate way to, I don't like that characterization, that's dismissive. This is how we're characterizing it, this is how we see it. And so I'd like to acknowledge that I don't think that you guys are, it may be that this is completely the right way to go, and it's the only legal option presented to you, which I think is actually what would have come out of the committee. But that it was promised all along it would come back for a vote and it didn't, feels wrong to me. And I would rather vote no and have it be something that over the next year is worked on. And it's unfortunate because 8 is too small a number, but that's just where I come down.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just a point of clarification. I wanted to be clear that there was a vote, and it may have been done as a better vote, but I just wanted to be clear because it would not be right of the board to have warned this without a vote.
Right.
And so while I'm taking exception to the fact that we could have done the vote differently, but the board did act appropriately. There was a vote. The vote was 8-0 for this slate of amendments. So, that's why I'm reiterating, because people keep saying it was never voted on. No, it was voted on October 16th. And so that's what I'm trying to be clear about, that the board did not take inappropriate action and this shouldn't go through.
I don't disagree with that. It was the process leading up to that vote, which I believe that vote wasn't what we as community members who are watching was expecting or was essentially told would happen. So I don't disagree. I mean, like this, I'm not going to vote no because I think this is illegal.
Yeah.
I'm going to vote no because I didn't like the process. So this is a good clarification, but I still stand by my own feelings on it.
That's why it goes to the community. You get to have a voice in this. We're just trying to get something out there as a board. So I did not mean to, but I just want to be clear. I just want to say we followed the rules. So could have done a better job, as I said before.
And I just want to add that we also spent an astonishing number of hours. And one of the things that happens when you're really familiar with something is that you just kind of assume that everybody else is too. That understanding or the development of it and all the little details and things that happen along the way. And the other thing that was happening, which is we haven't really mentioned at all, the reason that the vote is on November 19th and that we did all of this when we did it was because we had to have it done by 40 days before that, or it would have been Thanksgiving, or it would have been Christmas, or it would have been January, but it wouldn't be January because then there's February vacation, so we wouldn't have had it. It would have been town meeting day, and we would not have had any of this formalized. And so we were under not just the pressure to try and figure it out and to do it right, but also, and it would be legal, but also constantly pushing against the calendar and trying to get it done. And again, it wasn't a perfect process. Obviously, if we could do it all over again, we would have run through, and especially if we hadn't had a zillion other things coming at us, we would have taken the whole meeting and talked about every single one. But there was so much else going on and so much else pressing, and it seemed, I think, to all of us that this really is the way we need to do it. And So this is the path that we took, and I would really prefer that you support it because of what it is, rather than not supporting the process.
Well, being that we're here just to inform,
I can't say that?
can't say that, but.
Can you edit that out, Rich?
Yeah, that is an important
Just
distinction. That is an important distinction that we didn't know
Yeah,
until
I'm sorry. I should've-
like
I
right
forgot.
before we had to warn it, that in order to, because we thought we could wait until January to do it and have elections simultaneously, pass the amendment and vote. And the Secretary of Elections came to us like the week before and said, no, you have to do them as separate votes. So we were hoping that we would have longer to go through the process, but then in order to get somebody and not have to hold a special election, which is like $20,000 when you put it all together, which is money out from education fund, in order to do that, it was like, we need to do it now because of Veterans Day and this and the 10-day and Christmas and holidays and vacations and everything. So that was the other Monday holidays and everything. So it was kind of like a boom, we have to do it now, or you don't get it for this year. So that was the other thing that sort of came out of it. It's a world to me now of all the calls to the Secretary of State's office. Paul.
Paul Normandow. Regarding the legality, you know, and so you made a reference to the legal options, and you've got an attorney, Mr. Ottinger, who has taken one stand. However, I am a little skeptical. You know, you can talk to two lawyers or three lawyers, and you might get three different opinions. But my my point is, I don't think the Agency of Education would have let this proposal go out with a 2-2-2-2 without vetting it through their attorneys and allow this to go through, because many communities are doing same, you know, they're not taking into consideration populations in terms of assigning representation. So I question the results of the attorneys and the concept that it's illegal. I don't think it is. And if it is, those things get resolved in court.
Well,
So anyway,
and
that's
I think the characterization was he felt that this was the most legal. You know, I don't think he said.
Is there most legal and less legal?
More likely,
closest
yeah,
to
sure,
legal.
because when you decide in court, that's how you decide, like what is the
That's the
most
ultimate
likely
decision.
to survive a court fight, which, you know, so
Right.
that, I think that was his, looking back on, you know, I talk really fast during those conversations, so I'm very stressed because they're not cheap, so,
Yeah.
but I think that would be a better characterization of what he advised us.
But in any event, I don't think the Agency of Education would have let this come out if it was patently illegal.
Yes. Roger, sorry.
Roger Turner, Dummerston. How do you transition from being a person from Dummerston who's taking Dummerston's interests at heart to being a person who is now considering the needs of all four towns? And how do the interests of Dummerston, how are they actually represented then in the end in a vote?
Wow, you ask very good questions, Rod. Very good philosophical. It's a very difficult transition, I will say. Oh, yeah.
Part of the first part, because I just had an experience with it. One of the things that happens is that you, well, first you decide that you're going to really think about everything and try and be inclusive, and not just when we're at the high school talking about high school things, not be considering other things, and then someone will come along and say, well, we were talking about fields, and somebody came along, I believe unnamed, and pointed out that, well, what about the elementary school fields, and what about equity? What do we know about the quality of those, and how are we going to? Are you going to address that as well? And all of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, we have to do that. And we've got administrators who are used to focusing on their schools and having their own boards, and we've got boards that are used to focusing on their schools and having their own towns, and everybody has to readjust. And I think that one of the things going to help us, or helped us so far, is that we're getting good input from the communities, and we're doing everything together. We're going to do the entire budget process together. We're not bending committees off doing that. We're all working on committees now. We see each other more than once every 2 weeks, in fact, more than once every 2 weeks. And it's building sort of an identity of the board. And it's us against the world now instead of us against the voters of whichever town, or the people that come forward and are consistently critical from this town. So it's kind of it's a gradual process, but it really is it's a consciousness process. And I think when we start doing the budget, it's going to get very concrete.
I think-
we'll see. how
I
that
think I'll
works.
follow along to say that we have a programmatic and performance equity committee that is just sort of getting going, but took too long.
Time's up.
Love that. Steal that bell. I'm going to borrow that bell long term. So it sort of is highlighting the programmatic differences, and so it might not be that everything is going to be exactly the same, but when you say, well, this school has this, are we giving the same opportunities to this other school? So when you can look at data, for me, when I can look at data, and I love kids, I want all the kids to be successful, so when you have the data to say, wait a minute, this school really needs some support academically in math, we need to put resources towards that school, and you look at the results of the school and say, wait, are they really doing what they should be capable of doing? Are we really bringing those kids up in the way that we need to bring all of them? That's a really helpful thing to me to see. And then, one of our things was, wait a minute, we need to get pre-K into Dummerston. That was one of the acts before. And so I take that learning piece and bring it to, wait a minute, let's make sure the pre-K opportunities for all the communities are pretty equivalent. So that's a really important thing that we know is good for kids. And so let's make sure we're supporting equivalently throughout the district pre-K. That would be a goal of mine. So,
Well,
some things are easier.
Just to follow up, I think that the equal representation is a good response to the potential for towns acting in their self-interest. And so, in that respect, I think 3-3-3 would even give you 2 more people to help you work. And the other thing I just reflect on is in the Reformer Sports page in the last couple of days, there was a summary of the winners of the Athlete of the Week award for the fall. So it was all the local schools. All the winners were Bellows Falls or Brattleboro. There was no Leland and Gray kid who won. There was no Twin Valley kid who won. And why is that?
Just to add to the realness of your concern, I was on the Waste Management District Board as a Brattleboro representative when the decision to close the MRF, the recycling facility, happened. And aside from the fact that it had already run out of money and was spending some of the money from the closure fund, I guess it's not called the closure fund, but the money that's there to make sure that covered landfill stays safe, and that it really was not viable, I really resisted it because the other towns were really working hard to try and figure out a way to make it work better for Brattleboro. And my board fired me from being on that and appointed somebody else who would go and just vote to close it and get it done. And even though it was an inevitable decision, because Brattleboro was really paying a disproportionate amount of the cost, that's not even debatable. Brattleboro acted very much in its own interests. And the consequences that you folks now drive your recycling to Brattleboro. But if Brattleboro had said nothing, the same thing would have happened. It just would have been a few months later, because it was not viable. And without the MRF, you can't justify the trucking. And anyway, so that is how it works. I mean, there's no question about it. And I'm hopeful that because it's 4 people and because it's education, it'll work out better. But Brattleboro had 6 votes out of 24. So it wasn't just Brattleboro that made that happen, but we get the blame for it, absolutely.
Jody.
Just a quick comment. We've been operating here with the Supervisory Union for I don't know how many years, with 3 representatives from every single town. and that has worked wonderfully. And so that's why I don't, you know, and the supervisory union, if I'm not wrong, is the biggest budget we vote on, well, we have been voting on.
Not anymore, Joe.
Not anymore, I know, not anymore. But I think that shows that we could have had a 3-3-3-3 and worked very well together. And I like the fact that, you know, you're realizing the waste problem, because that's been a thing that we've been using
Yeah.
all along.
Well, it's-
So-
it's
and
not-
we don't want that to happen in education.
Yeah.
I would just like to comment and say, in reading the minutes from multiple committees on that, there wasn't a lot of reference to the actual discussion that was had. It was mostly indicating that they're waiting for feedback from the lawyer. So my recommendation to any committee is just take really good notes and put them out there for people to read if you're not going to have someone videotaping it or recording it sound-wise for people, just so that we can really fully, I mean, I think that's been evident that there's lots of discussion happening, but none of it is noted in a lot of the committee meeting notes. So that would be my one.
I think we're trying to go beyond the statute as a general rule, and we do a great job, especially when we have our fabulous board recorder, Wendy Levy, or Tim Morris, who's an amazing note taker who then spends a full day doing it. The statutory requirement is that people present, adjournment time, any motions, and how the vote was. And I think we are going beyond that, and I think people are really trying to do that. And David does a pretty darn good job trying to indicate that. But point taken, I can try and push people. I mean, before this, people didn't even. You should see some of the committee notes that were happening a couple of years ago.
I've seen them.
So we've kind of, and I'm pushing people. They have to be warned. They have to, like, Kelly knows. I'm like, agendas, people, warnings, minutes in 5 days. It's a lot to put on these citizens who have to get them to bar. Doesn't happen by magic. So I will push a little bit more, but at least we have about 100%.
Especially on the hot topics. Like,
Well,
yeah.
especially on the hot topic. Then we have people come and talk, and people are trying to be part of a committee as well as a recorder. So it's, as well as a clerk. So my hat's off to anybody who does that. Thank you, David, for doing it for the policy amendment committee. I will ask for more thorough notes. We are getting a note taker now for finance committee, which is where all the money gets expended. So that will help with that committee. Yes.
Paul Namando again, when you mention a finance committee, my hackles go up a little bit, because I can go back and think about the BUHS finance committee, and they kind of functioned as an executive committee. They were dealing with personnel, they were dealing with budgets, they were dealing with a whole bunch, a myriad of things. They were the search committee for the new superintendent. They literally had the whole bundle of wax under one committee. Wasn't filmed. Very little transparency in terms of what they were talking about, other than when it came time to do a vote. And I would urge the new board, that don't overload one committee with a whole lot of with virtually running the whole shoot match.
I think good committee procedure is that the committee does the work assigned to it by the full board. And that's what we're kind of working through our mission statements, but
Well, I guess I would caution the full board, don't go in that direction.
Thank you.
Well, just to clarify, because one of the things that we also have been waiting for time in a meeting to do, which is go over the missions that the committee's developed to make sure that that's what we have in mind. But they really don't have the ability to take any action without coming back to the board and presenting that. Is that what you're talking about? And sometimes, there are committees in the past that really were operating independently in a lot of ways, and they just came at the end with a final proposal and said, here you go.
I view a finance committee as almost a budgetary committee. Deal with the numbers. To me, that's a finance committee. It has nothing to do with personnel, has nothing to do with recruiting, has nothing to do with maintenance of property, other than the financial aspects of it. So,
You might want to, we could look at reconsidering that. The finance committee became that because it used to be finance and buildings and grounds, facilities. And then I think I'm not sure the personnel and negotiations wound up being there too.
No, they're not in
no?
our committees,
Not in
no.
your
Personnel.
No, not in our committees,
Oh,
but in
but
the
in there.
past,
Yeah.
that wound up being the same.
Well, that's not,
Yeah, I know, that's passed.
That's-
It's, yeah.
I guess I'm just using that as an example, as a cautionary,
I think our committees have been, for the most part, pretty good at following those guidelines, and I've sat on committees that maybe started to veer, and I've tried to veer them back to say, wait a minute, this is not our purview. Our purview is X. And so-
Well, is the current finance committee in charge of buildings and grounds?
Yes, that was an original assignment from the
Yeah.
summertime,
I
which
would
was the
think-
historic.
I would rethink that.
Yeah, that
too.
surprised me to find that out.
Because that discussion came out with, when they're talking about the fields. And it seems like, it was preordained from from that committee to come out with a recommendation. I know you may take issue with me because I know you want it.
But we're here to talk about this, so, getting back to point of order and staying on point. Yes, Tara?
Question 2 and 3 were modified during the 10-16 meeting to include and parentheses, things. I don't see that in here, so those were not made as part of
She said there was a
the
process.
changes.
I don't understand your question.
So, on 10, I brought it up because I was looking at it. On 10-19, they voted, some discussion ensued on the criteria for closing school. Tim suggested adding and a semicolon in a few places to help clarify the language on school closure criteria. You had indicated she would ask Barb about her to make the adjustments to the wording prior to doing it.
Those final last grammatical changes, I would
Yeah.
say, to clarifying grammatical changes, the board voted to send me and Emily Murphy-Cower, who's the queen of all grammar, and who else was there that morning?
I don't think it was me.
I don't think we're
Was
there.
it Annie?
Maybe it was the two really good grammatical people and then just me who was along for the ride. And we walked through and made the changes. So the board gave those changes by a vote to that small subcommittee to meet with Barb and just iron out to make sure, because by that time I think it was 10 o'clock because we'd had a big turf discussion. So went to the grammatical king and queen and Barb and just made the last few changes. There were semicolons, parentheses, and things like that. So that's how
Will
that.
they appear on the vote, on the piece of paper that we're voting on? Or
Yes, they appeared,
They're there,
that was the final.
just not
Yes.
in what was warned.
So that was
Not
what
in
was-
this.
Isn't this the ballot?
This is the ballot.
This is
So
the
these are the
ballot.
final changes that were made when we grammatically sat through
Oh.
with Barb.
I see after occur you have,
And there were things like, there were different ways of saying, there was one sentence, so there were two different ways of saying the same thing at the bottom, something about time related or.
But weren't there, but there
It was
aren't
literally
ands,
like 2 words.
there aren't ands and colts, there are semicolons and ands that were supposed to be added.
But then we sat down, so
And then you changed it and you just added that all the following occur. Is that the change that you made?
I am not going to answer that off the top of my head because I was there at 7:30 the next morning after being until a meeting at 10:30. So it was that, the final grammatical brushing up was given to the subcommittee to do with Barb in the morning because it had to go out by 9 o'clock. So that
And it
committee-
happened, it just it didn't happen as you envisioned it the night before.
Right, they were grammatical changes, and so nobody could think grammatically at 10 o'clock at night after a heated turf battle. I knew I'd manage a turf pun before the night was out. It was a big grassroots effort on the turf.
We hope.
I've been waiting for that one.
I think those were the changes.
Jody,
I just want to thank the board for all the work that they are doing, and they are really doing the work. I just declined to run for this board. I knew what was going to happen. So some people who felt stronger than I did about we needed to have some good people on ran, and they got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you, gives you something to do at night, too.
Oh, I need something to do.
You might as well be on the board, Jody, you can all be there. Ruby?
I'd like to reiterate that I think that the board is doing a great job, and actually to speak to something that you, this gentleman from Dummerston has said, I have felt in the past few months very well served by members of the board who are not from my town. And I've gone to the equity committee meeting and felt really respected, heard. The concerns I was bringing, which were around aftercare, there were like very concrete discussion points back, and it's made me feel like when I consider a reality where Brattleboro would have more members than my own town, I'm less anxiety-ridden about it because I've seen in action that these people really are serving my kid. And so from that piece, I have confidence that however we go forward, I feel confident, at least in how I've seen the practices of this board, that all of our kids and all of our communities will be served well, regardless of where the representative is from.
Thank you, Ruby. Maybe
I think that's a testimony to the existing board members.
To the individuals.
Yes, and then you hope that the same quality and the same philosophy will continue on into the future. Having witnessed the study committee over several years, it was not that level of cooperation and philosophy, I don't believe permeated the study committee. I think it was very parochial.
I just want a little point of clarification though, because when you're on a study committee, you're wearing a hat of your community. So when I sat on the study committee, I represent the interests of Dummerston. I don't represent the interests of all the communities. So you're elected to represent Dummerston. Brattleboro is elected to represent Brattleboro. And I do think there's a philosophical difference that this whole board has embraced very fully. We represent all the kids, and I will say it has been a pleasure to serve with this board thus far because I think people have gone forth with that, and that is actually legally what we are supposed to do, and I think people have put that into their acts. But you're not supposed to actually act in the interest of Brattleboro as a Dummerston representative, you know. So it is a little.
It's subtle, but I think the study committee could have been a little more broader in their view, because their goal, if you recall, I'm sure you do, you were there, was to, their goal was to lead us to merger, basically. And that's essentially what they did. That's what their proposal came out. And so I was, and there were some good things, good discussions that did take place, but there still was that imbalance that took place.
Well, that's what 5111 looks. 51111 and then -1.
Right.
Is a that's more challenging than what we're.
I appreciate the people who are on this board very much so, but I do worry very much down the road that we're going to end up with the same people.
Some of the same cast of characters.
Some of the same cast of characters.
I just want to get through, I really just want to get through this and make sure the public's questions are answered. And it's in your hands now.
Well, just to let you know, this is overwhelming to the public.
Yes.
This is just not acceptable, the process. Because you're complaining about moments in here, and I, as the general public, have like come to, are you gonna go into a voting booth and just understand?
That's ridiculous.
So I don't know if there's like, you're talking about specific, whether there's a comma or there's not, and I'm just like, is there any way to like make a general point of what is the reasoning for each, that what we're voting for?
There's two comments in the Commons today. One from a Brattleboro rep and one from me, trying to make it clearer. So you might want to look at that.
I thought your PowerPoint was actually
Yeah,
really,
very
it
good.
was.
really
And that was my attempt tonight, was to say, this is what it means, and this is why we're doing it. That was my attempt. I missed the mark, but.
You gotta
but-
change it before
and
you send it to him, though.
It's very confusing because we have to do it in this legislative format because we're changing an existing document that's like 15 pages long or something. So you have to say what you're without submitting a 15-page document and saying, here's the new document and here's the old document, which there's not very many tenable ways to do this. And you'll be happy to know your school board members are very cheap and don't want to pay for 2 elections. So we thought about splitting it, but that meant an extra $20,000 $15,000 probably expenditure to print the ballots and run the elections. So we didn't want to spend an extra $15,000, so figured we'd do the best we can. So,
Just to add, we also didn't want to, we wanted to have the election of the board members on the town meeting election day too. We didn't want to have a separate time to do that because people wouldn't show up. But another aspect of why this is, why, we have 2 opportunities to explain this to the public, it's, gets in the media, but it's really, really complex and difficult, is that rather than, after they told us we had to merge, they said, and you have, what, 3 months, was it? How many? I can't even remember what a short time it was. It was a very short period of time. And there were several efforts to get an extension to that. The political pressure in the legislature was such that we couldn't get an extended time to actually do all this work while the initial boards or the legacy boards were in place, so that we could figure this out on the way and make, take time to really explain it and go through it. It's really, it's been an incredibly jammed together process.
And it's confusing to us who've been part of it for 5 years, so I can imagine it's been confusing to us who've been part of this for 5 years. I can imagine people who don't have a clue.
Well, you folks have been paying attention to a lot of it too,
Yeah.
because I see you here.
Yeah, you came.
Yeah, could you make these slides, the ones that have the green and the blue? There's one for each of the articles. Could you make those into a one-pager that people could? I mean, because you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're not saying vote one way or the other.
Right.
You're saying this is the change.
yeah.
So that could be passed out at, in schools at the ballot box. It could go in the reformer. And I think
maybe
that,
we're going in the reformer
honestly,
together,
that,
yeah.
I have really been paying attention, and that is the clearest layout I've seen so far. And I think that, I would hope that would help people who really haven't been paying attention because they got stuff to do. It's not anyone's fault. But I am afraid that people just aren't going to show.
So I will send this, thank you for the suggestion, I'll send this over to communications and say, can you get this in the reformer in some way and clean it up so it works a little better, but that's a great suggestion to try to.
Yeah, that's because we still have,
With the appropriate.
we still have some
Yeah, I'll
time.
make the
And
fixin'.
the committee's meeting tomorrow, and they've generated a much better list of outlets, so it's possible to get out.
Christina?
Yeah. Yes.
It might also be helpful for people who haven't been able to come to meetings and so forth. The term grade operation is packed with a lot of meaning, and it would be wonderful to have a definition of that
Sure.
available.
Okay.
Can you say it again, Sue?
I'm recommending that a definition of the term grade operation accompany
Change
Any
in the grades.
materials that are
operating
being made
schools.
available, but also, I don't know if it's possible to have that on the amendment for, on the ballot.
Yeah,
I guess they're all printed, but,
That's one of those 40 days.
but it's one of those things.
Yeah.
You walk in and what does that mean?
So I have which grades are operated in each school. I'll think about that, but anyway.
It's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. We didn't want to add anything to that ballot because we were already weighing in a lot of words. So.
I'm just saying a lot
Yeah.
of the decision-making bounces back to that term.
Yeah. Yes.
Totally trivial, but when you have the green, the current, I know with my eyes, I can barely see the green at
Okay.
all. The right-hand side is clear. So next time you do this with I think that you have another community meeting.
Tomorrow, I can change my font color. That'll be Brattleboro. I gotta get a bigger spread, I think. A few more people attending, I suspect.
Yes, thank you, Christina, for all your.
Thank you for coming.
And the board.
And there's 2 other board members here,
Yeah.
David.
Oh, Kelly Young, too. Fabulous Kelly Young.
From
Who hails from down south in Guilford. So I will adjourn the meeting at 7:11. Thank you. I guess we don't really have a quorum.
Still
But all those in favor of adjournment, signify by saying aye. Aye. Nays, abstentions, as we have it, we are adjourned at 7:11.